Hi, everyone. Well, hello. Welcome to Cyber Witch. Happy New Year, everyone. We hope that you're all excited about a new year. We certainly are. Welcome to Cyber Witch, your online resource. Your online resource for empowering your occult and spiritual knowledge. Welcome. I'm Orly Stewart. I'm a student of traditional yoga and Tantra. And this is my boyfriend, John Vermillion. He is an expert on spiritual physics and also aliens. So today we're talking about ET races and their characteristics. We have a very exciting show for you today. We have a very exciting show. We've had a lot of very strange things happen in prep to try to make this show possible. And everything is based on the new blog post from the Violet Gateway that Vermillion has written on ET races and their characteristics. So you can read the entire post on his website, linked in the description of this video as well.
Yeah, you can kind of follow along too, because I figured since we're going to be talking about them, I'll follow the way that the actual thing goes.
That's a great idea. So yeah, you can pull up the blog if you want to follow along and look at the photos.
Yeah, and of course, like ask questions and comments and stuff like that in the things in the chat. I wrote this blog because I asked a lot of questions about this, and especially in like a lot of the classes that I do, and even some of the little, points that I put in the books and stuff, questions, and I always end up talking about them indirectly throughout the work, and I'm being asked more about these, so I figured I'd put together a kind of a whole blog based on not only my own experience, but like out of body experiences, dreams. When I say dreams, it was more like conscious lucid dreaming, not just like some random dream, or also just telepathy in the non-synthetic form, since there's a couple of blogs on there about synthetic telepathy as well. And I've been being asked a lot about those questions about synthetic telepathy, and people are kind of waking up to the fact that that could be very, very real. So I figured we'll go through various races and ask questions, and you can talk about them too, because I know you've had some experiences too.
Through my whole life, and especially even more now. Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks so much to everyone who's joining here today. We see a lot of familiar faces.
We do.
The United Virtues, Wolf Bright, Source Adversary, Crystal Green, Casting Cauldron, Dematology, the Stitch Witch, Sandy, Scottish Witch, Sorsha, Circus, Salem. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our exciting revealing of various alien races. Not all of them, of course.
No, that's not all of them. The thing is, I get asked about, and there's some of that in the chat too. I get asked about certain, races or, entities that people have communicated with or interacted with. And if I don't know it, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm sure they probably do exist, and I've seen some things that I can't even describe, or I didn't even put on the list because I can't, label it. I can't, my human logical mind's like, label it. So if I can't label it, or if I don't know anything about it, I typically won't talk about it. But this whole list is something that I put together that I've actually experienced, and it's massively changed my life, and usually the people around me in my life. So it's quite amazing. So we'll talk about it, and if there's any questions about any of them in there in the chats, we'll try to answer them, and also share your experiences if you have seen this or interacted with something like this. It'd be cool I'd like to hear other people's experience, because it makes me not feel so so out of base in a sense.
Me too.
Yeah, like, oh good, you too. So we'll really start out with kind of what everybody knows as like the Greys, because that's kind of the biggest misconception I almost feel in the whole alien ET races is the Greys. And it's funny because you can even see them like heavily portrayed in like the South Park, how they like bombarded you with like, hey, these are Greys here, and they're like little pictures of them somewhere randomly in some of the scenes. And it's a normal image in our minds as humans in our experience to see that image, but there's a lot of them. There's like a lot of different ones. The typical grays that are working with like abduction scenarios or, with the military are the Zeta Reticulans. They're not even, you can't even consider them negative. They're just kind of a AI hive mind group that's kind of programmed for governmental things, and they just tend to come from some place that they call Zeta Reticuli.
Can you tell people the descriptions of their appearance if they're
Yeah.
not following along on the blog?
Yeah, they're like 3 to 5 feet tall ish, usually much shorter, and they're very thin. Their noses don't even look like noses, just kind of like holes in the body, and their mouths are like a slit. They don't even need their mouths, so it's just kind of like almost like it's more of like a breathing apparatus, like a gill, I guess you'd almost call it, rather than like a mouth. But that's pretty much what they look like. They're more gray and kind of wrinkly. They have like a wrinkle to their skin appearance, if you would call it that. But they're the most popular, and it's the imagery you're shown throughout everything. They were very popular in like the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. I have their books that I showed you at one point, and they're really cool books. I suggest people read them. They were definitely being abducted. They were definitely being abducted. I would say that their experience is very real, and there's some pretty cool information in it. But the Zeta Reticulans are considered more negative and governmental, and they're working with more of the negative side of things, which a lot of us would consider negative anyway. There's also another race called the Orions. They also look like grays, but they're, for lack of a better word, they're extinct. They don't exist anymore because they bred out a bunch of the characteristics and they became clones and then just shifted into basically what the Zeta Reticulans are. But they just, they don't really exist anymore. So we don't really put much attention to that. I found that out in remote viewing. So from some of my remote viewing that I did, I think it was like 8 years ago, 8-9 years ago, I would say, there was only like a couple hundred of them left. So they were on their way out. So even 8, 9, 10 years ago, about that time mark, there was still a few of them really existing. But from what I know now is that they're unfortunately all gone. So who knows why, but they're gone. The Zeta Reticulans, if they do manifest, they smell like sulfur. And I think that's where a lot of the whole demon lore of demons smelling like sulfur, or these apparitions that appear in people's rooms or whatnot that smell like sulfur. I think that actually comes a lot from that. So they're a little bit more quote unquote negative, and they did make a ton of treaties with people, and they're quite interesting. But I've never had a positive interaction with them.
A lot of people tend to see them in dreams. And tell me about it when they have consultations with me. Yeah. And it's usually a little bit alarming for them.
Yeah, they feel weird. It's not even that the fact that they look different. It's that the fact that their energy feels so intense.
It's like striking. I've seen them in dreams. Like they weren't doing anything to me. They were just like, hey, we're here.
Yeah.
Hello, we're looking at you.
And that's the thing. They're kind of like workers. That's the thing. They're like workers. Like they would be like if you went into like a store and you had your customer service representatives, they're kind of like that of all the other races in a sense. So it's a very common seen thing in these experiences, but there's so many different ones. So and I will pinpoint the next ones I'll talk about, the Zeta Andromedans. They are different than what the Zeta Reticuli would be, and even though they look identical. The only difference from them is the Zeta Andromedans look very, very smooth, like super smooth.
A lot of people would think that these were just the overall grays are one kind of race, but it's very nuanced, and there's a lot of things that either actually look like that, or they're wearing something that's making them look like that, or they're not even an organic being.
Correct. Yeah. And I know them as like a sulfur-based still construction. Like they're like, if we're carbon-based, they're based in like the sulfur element. You know what I mean? We're carbon-based life forms. They're a sulfur-based life form. So if you look at like jinn, they talk about Islam where they're like, oh, jinn are made of smokeless fire. They're made differently than humans are. They're made out of a different elemental property than us humans. They're made out of a sulfur-based So that's why they give off the smell of sulfur. Even the Zeta Andromedans smell slightly like sulfur, even though they're very different in the Zeta Reticuli or even the Orions, way different. So it's an interesting thing to bring up because the difference between the Zeta Andromedans and the Zeta Reticuli, or the Zeta Andromedans, have absolutely no play in anything realistically. They kind of have their own thing going on. They're more of a biological AI where they, in their lore, they call themselves more like if an archangel had a body. So they're like this body that this higher consciousness can experience out of it. It's absolutely wild, and I've personally had interaction and communication with them since I was just a little kid. I was highly afraid of them when I was a little kid because I'd come up from dreams and certain experiences where, I thought the demons were there, and all these negative entities or whatnot, even though I even know demons not even negative nowadays. But I looked at them as negative because they were so alien to me. But then they're like, no, it's okay. It's okay.
When I
it's
would see the manifestations of what we would umbrella call gray aliens, they were not small ones, but they were like the size of like an adult human, and they were very like decrepit looking.
Yeah.
And they were not moving, but they would be all around, like in a tableau, standing all around me when I was a kid in my room at night. And it would happen all the time and scare me so much.
And those are the tall whites that I was, I told you about. They look just like gray, just much taller. Yeah. And they look older and like almost like primordial. Yeah. They're cool looking. And we'll touch on those too. But yeah, at first it scares you. It does. It really does. So I think the Zeta Andromedans, they're really considered like one of the most advanced technologically, spiritually. I mean, even in my interaction, I'm just like, how can you guys be so emotionless and logical? Like I've never in my whole life felt emotion or any like, I like this is good or this is bad. It's just straight information. This is how it is. There's no sway. It's very interesting with them. So these are the grays that I've personally had experiences with is them. But the reticuli ones and various my lab experiences and abduction experiences are typically not seen as positive findings. Yeah, I would. You're lucky you have the tall whites, or they're more aloof. Yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but they're just they look the same. They're just much taller and they're just very old and ancient and don't really care about the things going on.
They make me do stuff.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
And you don't really have a choice, and it's always something helpful. Like, it's not anything like fucked up. It's always like, you have to do art or we're going to take you away. Or you need to draw this picture now to show people how all their dimensions can come out of your brain.
Yeah. It looks like lagging on the video.
Of course we're lagging.
Of course we're lagging.
Of course it's lagging. We are constantly improving the tech conditions of this channel. So do not fear. We are always trying to upgrade and make things better and fix problems as they come.
Yeah, but the topic we're talking about, I could imagine that things are slowing down a little bit.
Yeah, we had a lot of stuff happen.
Yeah, we sure did. So I mean, that's really what I kind of lump up in the gray umbrella. Is there's tons of different ones. They're all there. You can look at it as like the Zeta Andromedans explained to me, like they were the original ones, and their skin was stolen, so to speak. So like their technology of what they are was stolen from a ton of different things. So that's why our government can use them. It's pretty widely used. So it's almost like a like a for lack of better terms, like a Halloween costume. Like everybody can get it, and you can do it whatever you want with it. So it's one of those type of things. So it's very much a topic of discernment if you do see them, because sometimes, I mean, just the sight of them, you're gonna be like, oh my God, what is that? But really get to like feel it, even if the negative ones can project a good feeling to you, it's not use discernment. Even if they're projecting good feeling to you, it might not be, I can tell you the difference in the auric structure of Zeta Andromedan and a reticulan or a gray, and one's going to have a darker shades of like, I don't know, like this navy-ish color, like navy blue to like an indigo color, while the Zeta Andromedans are going to have like more of a blue hue, like a very bright electric blue. Look, their electricity coming off of them almost. Wolf Bright says sounds like free software in the public domain. Yeah, it's kind of open source. It really is, and it's weird. It's weird to talk about that because I don't think there's a lot of people that talk about the craze in that form. But in a sense, it is. It'd be like you being able to buy this living computer in a sense and be able to connect it to your own AI algorithm. I mean, that's really what it is. The Zeta Andromedans they claim to be more of like an angelic consciousness because they serve a function. They kind of all work for one thing, and they're super God related. Like everything's about God. Like you can ask them about the mouse on the computer, and they'll be like, "Well, God is well." They're very God oriented, which is interesting because they have no religion either.
So how does that work?
I don't know.
Okay.
They know God exists. They know it's a thing. But they don't have a religion. They're very Buddhist and but not like the Buddhist religion. Do you have anything to add on the grays?
So there's a lot of areas of the world that are specifically part of programs with them, or have been, and that has ended.
Yeah.
So you'll often find phenomenon in like a lot of documentaries, movies about certain towns or areas where a lot of people have these kind of experiences, because it actually is, it's not just that person, but it's like where they've decided to live. That's an area that's from them.
Yeah.
But those things aren't really happening as much anymore as they were before. But not as publicly, I guess.
It's not as publicly, like things like the cattle mutilation and stuff. It's all that was because of them than the ones working with like the reptilians and all that. And it's like those projects have kind of slowed down, if you would, but that's just kind of what they do. They've been doing this for long time. They ain't gonna stop, even though if it's gonna become disclosed that there's more going to be hidden from everybody. The next would be the more of like the Nordics, like the Pleiadians and all that kind of stuff. I feel they're very popular, and as far as I know, and from my personal experiences, they're walking amongst us. Like you wouldn't know the difference between a Pleiadian and a normal human. Like, yeah, a lot of them have blonde hair, blue eyes, but there's also other factors to them. Some have brown hair, some have green eyes, some have, and they look just like humans. They're just highly psychic. They operate on a very, very high psychic level. So they're really not different from us. They do have technically more technological aspects, and they're a little bit more advanced when it comes to travel and spiritual technology, but realistically, outside from them being considered an ET or an alien race, they are absolutely no different than Earth humans, which is interesting. So and they got really popular in the New Age circle with like a lot of like channeling and stuff. So if that can, if anybody read the other blogs of my opinions on channeling, it's who knows where that came from. They could have still been working with, other things, so it's, I do really like some of their channeling work from the New Age area, but it's very far and few between.
Yeah.
Sure.
We've got some really great questions in the chat. So Wolf Bright's asking, are alien races actually dangerous to humans?
Yes.
Yes and no. Yes and no. And then Crown is asking about your opinion on the RH negative blood. We usually have people ask about this when we talk about aliens. Yeah. So can you elaborate, please?
It's just, it's not that it's really new. It's just that they're finding more things about like different characteristics of the blood. So it's nothing new. It's all blood types are technically, alien or ET in nature. Since RH is becoming more new and more fresh within everybody's thing, I think they're pinpointing it more to be like, oh wow, this is so different in ET. But do keep, you know, kind of tabs on it. You know, it might have in whole qualities of how your cells process differently within your body to be able to interact with your etheric body or astral body or mental body and have different effects on it. So, you know, I know people with like old blood types, they are typically heavily psychic because it's a very old primordial blood type. RH itself, I just see a lot of people having, you know, interesting experiences and psychic phenomenons when they have RH blood too. And then of course, like A and B have different genetic qualities. So it's just something to pay attention to kind of minorly. I have a pretty large health background and, you know, it plays more into diet and how you kind of operate more than anything else.
What people are asking is like, am I an alien if I have this blood type? That's what the question
Maybe.
is.
Yeah, maybe.
But you could be a part of an alien without having that kind of blood type. That's not the be all and end all indicating factor by any means.
And the reason I say that is because like human life, in my opinion, is not like really natural here. Like it's a seeded planet, so like a bunch of stuff has been put here. So we're not all naturally from here anyway. So kind of everybody is, you know.
Yeah, and we can discover the reason why when you study things like the yogic scriptures, like the Vedas, because the earth is special because here is a place that allows souls to go through an alchemical process when you live here or when you're interacting with the earth's energy. And so that's like a big part about why it's so special here.
Yeah. And that's why because it is special, that's why it takes so much attention to all these all these other onlookers. You're like, ooh, how can we manipulate? How could we help? How could we just watch? You know, it's like one of those things, you know. It's like Earth's like the galactic a reality show, basically. Carl Sporter says the best sighting I had when I stood a bit looking at the sky thinking, are you there listening? Because I know they can read minds. Then came a boomerang ship hovering over me, Brazil 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome, Carl. And they can, you know, I remember there's this old news thing. It was like public news. It was even live. There was this guy saying that he could like call orbs and weird UFOs in the sky, and everybody thought he was crazy. So they gave him this news time, and these news reporters interviewed him, and he did his thing, and he was like calling all these different names, and almost sounded like he was speaking in tongues. And it was really funny because there actually orbs showed up on the thing, and the people that were videoing, like, oh my god, what? And they all like were shocked. They're like, oh wow, this guy might actually be doing something. Yeah. And then you never heard about it or seen it again.
There's a great so Circus. So first of all, Carl is sharing his sighting.
Yeah, I just read the one.
Oh, that's okay. So Circus is saying there's so much BS online about aliens and where they come from. Some say space, some say inner Earth, some say another land beyond the Antarctic wall. Any thoughts on this? I think all of that is true. Yeah, but that's my personal opinion.
There's a lot in Antarctica that they're not going to be telling people for quite some time. I will definitely say that because I've tried to remote view, and I've remote viewed a lot of things in my life, and Antarctica is always like almost very violent in the way they throw you out of it. It's weird. So I think there's something more there than they would definitely release.
I was friends with an airline pilot for some time who was also into spirituality, and he believed in that about the Antarctic. I saw a pilot that flew all over the place.
I know a pilot that says the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also know engineers that say the same thing. So there's a lot of really intelligent people that believe in that kind of stuff.
And then as for the center of the earth, I mean, there's tons of books from different cultures about this. Yeah. Tons.
Yeah. And you know, the whole center of the earth thing, like imagine like these giant, vast cave structures. You know what I mean? It's not like it's hollow and you go down there and it's like a little dome, you know, like imagine giant cave structures that have basically their own biomes, you know? So we know those things exist. We know that exists. So we can find these caves like, oh wow, there's these plants growing down here and these weird animals. And we know these kind of things exist. Now imagine it deeper in places that we've never even discovered on what can be created down there. So I know from my personal experiences that it is real. So that I would definitely pinpoint yes to that for sure.
I definitely feel
Mhm.
that in my opinion as well.
Yeah. And there's islands and land on the surface that they do not put on maps. They're not putting on Google Earth. They're not putting in your on your phone, on your GPS. They're not doing it because they have the power not to do it. Why would they give it to you? And you would never know it existed unless you actually got on a boat or a raft and went to go find this island. Otherwise, we don't have to put it on the maps.
Oh, and we're getting to the Aldebarans next.
Oh,
so it's really
yeah,
the perfect,
perfect
time to transition into that one. So
Yeah.
speaking of
perfect.
that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Aldebarans. The Aldebarans are a very interesting race because I don't even really consider them extraterrestrial. I consider them more earthbound. Like they've been here for a lot longer than pretty much anything else, minus the reptilians, and they've been here since the seeding that I was talking about earlier. And they look pretty much average humans, but they look more elf-like. It's kind of like they look a lot like the elves on Lord of the Rings. I remember when I seen the Lord of the Rings and the way they depicted the elves, I was like, "Oh, you cheeky guys! Like you really put it out there like that." So they look more like that, but they have like a very white, translucent, almost like pale skin, and sometimes like a shimmer of gold. It's really weird, and they consider themselves very, very, very elite, if you will, and they kind of laid the foundations for like Atlantis and Agartha and the inner Earth territories, if you will. And it's kind of a thing that's talked about in the conspiracy world when it comes to like World War II and the SS and Nazi Germany experimenting with things.
And we're sharing this for historical
Yeah.
research purposes. And that is why we're talking about this.
Yeah, and so they are tied to that time period with like things like the Vril. If you do Vril research, you'll hear things about Mariah and the Aldebarans and stuff, and they're definitely a real race, but they're very advanced, and they didn't really have play in what they were doing in Germany. They were just a contact of various psychics that were working with them. So they're pretty much are the originals, and when they talk about things like the inner Earth and Agartha, this is really who they're talking about, and they hold the original, like you could call it like the genetic line. They hold the pure genetic line of like the original Lyrans, the original human Lyrans, not the cat ones, but the human ones. So they hold the original genetic Lyran prototype, if you will. So that's where they keep that to themselves. So the Lyrans do not intermingle, or the Aldebarans don't really intermingle. They kind of hold the same kind of mindset, if you will. And because they don't want to lose the Lyran genetic profile, so you can kind of look at it as this is what they want to do. They don't really work with reptilians. They're pretty much their own thing, and they definitely oversee a lot of things that are happening on Earth. They can call Earth their home just as much as Aldebaran or even Lyra, but Lyra doesn't exist anymore, so it's really either or. But they're very advanced, and those are really some of the beings that are found on the inner Earth. And if you look at the old Admiral Byrd books and what he was putting out and his experiences flying for the government, where he went into the inner Earth, said he was met with very tall, angelic looking beings that were very fair in nature, and it gives a very clear definition of what they were talking about. Ricky says, well, I 100% believe reptilians are the only ones that hold the truth. They are so advanced beyond comprehension. Ricky, I would say the Draconians do. I would agree with that. The Draconians know the truth. And the reason why I say that, and we're actually about to get into the reptilians, and because the reptilian hierarchy works on like a caste system, the higher level ones of the Draconians, they're from a complete different universe from what I know and can gather and what I've experienced. They're from a complete different universe. So I mean, if anyone has the most and really the highest profile within them, it would be those draconians, and you find it within the white-winged ones, or the white-winged draconians that you'd hear about. They are very advanced, and they're not even from this universe. They were either dropped here, or they were brought here, or they came here willingly. So in their advancement, I would probably agree with that. But like the warrior classes of reptilians and the lower caste systems that are more like governmental and military, and the invader races, they're just controlled, and they have their own, I can rule, I can take over this, and I'll do all that. But the higher draconians, for sure, I would agree that they probably know more than most. And that's why, like, the Lyrans and the Draconians and Aldebarans and Draconians, they don't have a war anymore, but there are reptilian classes that do have a problem, So the reptilian beings, they're usually seen with like slit pupil eyes, sharp claws. They're green, brown, scaly. They look like reptiles. The Draconians look more like dragons.
And then there's the whole like shape shifting aspect of it.
That's tech though. And that's something I think a lot of people don't want to talk about with the reptilians. That's technology. They can't actually spiritually do that like a Lyran would be too, or like a shapeshifter, or like a shaman, or something that can shapeshift on the astral. They can't. That's technology. They use it. So I've seen it on their belts, or I've even seen it on clothing that they'll wear. So it's really interesting how they interact with the technology that they have.
Yeah, and we have to obviously like be careful about things that we say on YouTube and the internet and whatnot. So a lot of these things are pieces that I think you can put together for yourself if you're an intelligent person. Mm-hmm. And if you're not, then sorry.
Yeah, right. yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I'm just kind of mentioning things and kind of going off the handle on some things, but I've had both positive and negative with them, with the reptilians, and a lot of times negative, sometimes positive. It's really depending on their caste system, where they're coming from, and it's very close to how the chakra system is. So if you look at the root chakra, it's like the lowest center in the body, and it's the lowest root chakra system. There's reptilians that are vibrating at more of those vibrations. I'm not saying that other entities aren't, like other spirits, or and these are all different from, like, these are different than succubuses or incubus, or elementals, or they're different. They're a whole different class. Circus Cult says there's this guy called Richard Bruce who slowed down frame by frame the Matrix movie and claims reptilians are in the movie and other movies. Weird stuff.
Interesting.
I would not doubt that for a minute. The Matrix movie was one of those movies that I revisited actually after my death.
I love that movie.
Yeah, I revisited after my death and decided to write like a 10-page like breakdown of all the symbolism and things that they were expressing in that movie, and I was like, oh, it's them. Bishop says, oh no, wait. Chromie status says, I've seen people shift more in theirs and facial characteristics. Yeah, I mean, and there's shamans on, physically here with us that can shapeshift, and they'll shapeshift to you in the astral and come to you in a dream and shapeshift. You'll see them and they'll shapeshift. This is a very real thing, and a lot of magicians and very in-depth magic practitioners can also shapeshift because they've been able to learn that ability or have it naturally in them. Reptilians don't exactly have a natural way to shapeshift, if you would. Should we move on to the next one?
Let's move on to the next one.
Okay. Arcturians. Yeah, they're fun. Yeah. I personally really like the Arcturians.
I do too.
Yeah. I've had a lot of experience with them. A good chunk of the majority of even Messiah Calexa is, Arcturian in nature
and
too.
then of course Zachael Stargate Chris.
That's heavily.
When I first started working on editing that, they gave me a psychic image of their flag, and I drew it out when I was meditating, and I showed it to you, and I was like, "Do you know what this is?" And you were like, "Look up on Google, just type in Arcturian flag."
I like just Google this real quick. Yeah,
that was cool.
They're nice. They're extremely advanced. I don't even know how to express that. I mean, they're telepathic, they're telekinetic, they can levitate. Everything about them defies our conception of physics. It's just like, wait a minute, teach me how to do this. They usually have blue or kind of greenish skin. They're a little bluish. They kind of look like grays, and that's the thing. Here's another being that looks like grays, but are totally 100% not. They have very expressive eyes, and it's almost like their eyes shape shift more than anything else. They're very, very pretty beings, very tall and lanky. Because they levitate and they don't eat, they don't do any of this kind of stuff. They're very kind of frail and almost wispy like, but they're very advanced. Edgar Casey, the psychic Edgar Casey, which I love Edgar Casey. If you have never actually researched Edgar Casey and only seen some YouTube stuff, or read a book about him once or twice, his work is really good. He even classified them as the most advanced race, and if we looked at it like a galactic structure, the most advanced race here. So they live in Arcturus in the boots, and they're very free. They're kind of like geneticists, so they work a lot with like genetics, but I don't mean that like in the physical sense. It's more on like the etheric and astral body, where our physical genetics actually come from. So that's kind of what they focus on. They have no technology that is based on weaponry. They are fully removed from war. They've transcended all of it. So if we want to look at something like an angelic ET, this is really be kind of them. They also have a very high level of telepathy, which bypasses the lower level of telepathy, which comes as like feeling, or like in a sense hearing, where it comes to like the solar plexus, where the feeling comes from in telepathy. They bypass that completely. It's just like image, tone, info, image, tone, info. But it's like, oh, it's just feels good. Like they comes with like a really good feeling behind it. And yeah, I've interacted with them a lot, and I've drawn numerous pictures, which you've seen.
Yeah, most of my art is either these guys or the next ones. Yep. And you can tell the difference because the next ones are kind of scarier, but the first ones are more like angels, but like angels that are aliens. Yeah. And that was a big part of my motivation as a painter, was to depict these things. I would just stare at a blank canvas, and then they would just show themselves to me, and I would just start pulling it forward. Yeah. So
yeah, that's great. It's good when you can, connect to that inspirational flow like that. It's good. Ricky says here, I believe that there are beings out there that can turn holograms into matter, vice versa. If you've ever seen a real UFO, you've probably seen it disappear with a sudden flash of light. Yes. And I'm glad you bring up the hologram thing, because if we look at it as like electromagnetic interference and how holograms are made, it's very much how it works. They don't even have to disappear. They can just, whoop, I'm not here anymore, but they are. You just won't see it because the electromagnetic spectrum is just not, they're still there with you. They're just not vibrating in that visual light spectrum to you anymore, and they can do this. And sometimes, I'm not saying like all clouds in the sky or ships or whatnot, but there are some forms of technology that, you can look at something unnatural in the sky and be like, wow, look at a really weird cloud, and it's the only one in the sky. And what electromagnetic field or anomaly is happening at that spot to create that, So if nothing else is in the sky except that, I'd kind of more lean that route, Sir's Cult says here, any thoughts on black budget projects, secret space program, and so-called experiences that have stories of being a part of these projects and meeting aliens? Also, the Phil Schneider lecture about nearly being killed by aliens. I write a lot about this on blogs on my website, The Violet Gateway. Me being personally an experiencer of those things, and really knowing that those projects exist without saying really more about it. It's really easy for somebody to make up a story about it, I guess. But it's a very real thing. I don't wouldn't pinpoint it as a name or anything like that, but it's a thing that's been a part of many smaller projects, and you can go on my website and find stuff about like Project Stargate, and I'll be writing another one about another kind of declassified one and going deeper in it later. But
and like all over the world, it's
yes,
not
all over
like
the world. It's not just here.
independent to a single country, and for a long time.
Yeah. Tiro Psychic Healer says Galactics, many look lovely. Pleiadian, Lumerian women, blonde. Do you see them? Yeah, the Pleiadian, which we talked about earlier, in the Lumerians. When Lumerian Atlantis was around, Atlantis was more like the Pleiadian Aldebarani type energy, whereas Lumeria was actually more of like the reptilian energy, and that's why they fought a lot even here. So in our Earth history, which goes back billions of years, realistically, there's a lot of interplay with the reptilians and other beings even on this planet. So it's they do exist, but I wouldn't call them like Lumerian or Atlantis, because they've kind of all, if Earth is a seeding planet, everything came here. Circus Cult says Alex Collier was the first guy I heard mention the Pleiadians. Yeah, and also he talked a lot about the Andromedans, not the Zeta Andromedans, but the Andromedan Andromedans. And the Andromedans are really like the tall whites. So when people are talking about tall whites, they're really talking about the Andromedans, and we'll get into that now. And they kind of look like pale-skinned humanoids, but they're very gray looking. They still look like the gray, but they're tall, wispy. Very slender, and they are actually pretty highly involved with a lot of military projects, but they're not involved in a way that they're trying to be malicious. They're kind of like helpers in a sense, and there's a faction that helps, and there's a faction that kind of works on spiritual things, and in my eyes, Alex Collier had the spiritual connection, which is really great. They do kind of look a little different to each one of them. Like the spiritual ones will look a little bit softer and not as,
I mean, Andromeda is a whole galaxy.
Yeah.
So one thing that is super cool, I've always been really interested in Andromeda and use that name for things, and I used it as my last name for the longest time when I used to do like art shows with all my alien art and everything. And it was because when I was in university, I took an astronomy class, and we were talking about black holes, and the Andromeda galaxy is very close to our Milky Way galaxy, where they're in what's called, I think, like a common loop, I believe is what the term is in science. Yeah, and so the idea is like eventually, in a super long time, they might collide into each other and cause a black hole. And so like edgelord teenager me thought this was the coolest thing in the world, and I just started just loving like this whole idea about Andromeda, and didn't know like the deep occult significance of it. That is just absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, no, they're really cool. I've experienced them in channeling experiences, like telepathy experiences, and I've interacted with them in like dream times and stuff too. And it's they're cool. I like them. It's described in the blog that they're kind of cautious, sometimes aloof, and they're not overtly hostile. I mean, if you do come at them and attack like those types of beings, they will have some kind of defensive motive to it, but they're really not.
When you see this kind of stuff, you're not really like compelled to try to be anything other than in awe when you have this experience.
I'll get you.
Or like you're like, I'm in the bathroom. Like, can you guys do this not right now? Like, yeah. So that's how it is. It's you're not really going to be like,
can you stop turning on my equipment and turning it off? And turning it off and turning it off. Yeah. So it's not something that they're benevolent, but they do work with various technological programs and government programs, and there's a lot of treaties, and there's been a lot of sightings and contact through various programs. Like if you're working for a black budget program, and next thing you know, you're making contact with these beings, and you're like, hey, let's do something. It's very much like bands coming together and creating a concert, but it's on a clearly a
Mhm.
completely different level, but the tall whites are very good. They're evolutionary. They've kind of bridged the spiritual and technological gap. So they again fuse technology with their spiritual prowess of it. And because of that, that's actually kind of why they look like the way they do, because their bodily form has to be able to anchor in so much of this energy. So it's interesting how the physical form changes based on how much energy the physical body is actually taking in from the universal level.
Is Simsim trying to speak into the microphone?
Simpson is trying to speak into the microphone. I better make some space here for him. He just lays right down. The cat had to join. Next one we'll move into is the insectoids, or like the mantids, and I've heard a lot of people talk about these. I've seen them. I've interacted with them. I I don't like to look at them as negatively, but they have a feeling that at first just puts you like, oh, just there's something off-putting about it. But there's benevolent ones, there's good, there's bad ones, there's good ones, what have you. When I was writing the book, Azaziel, the Book of the Fallen, when I was working with Azaziel, sometimes he would appear as one of these.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be like, what's going on? But it wasn't like a full-fledged one. It would look like a mantis made out of like a hue of colors, but just a mantis form. So it wouldn't have any form, just color and all this. So he would come off as that. And I always thought that was very interesting. They work more of like a hive mind. They don't really have a separation, but they're very, very telepathic. They're so telepathic that it doesn't come through just as a thought form. You actually hear clicking and like a chirping sound behind it, and it's very unsettling. Even if you're used to it, that sound, just even thinking about it, still sends chills down my spine. It's very, kind of sound, and it's weird. Kind of like what you think a mantis would sound like, but then you're having the impression in your head forcefully, telepathically, like you're in paralysis, and they're talking to you while in paralysis, but they're not saying anything, but you're knowing what it's saying. So they're very invasively telepathic, is what I would say. I don't know. Have you ever interacted with them?
I painted them before after I went through my whole alien encounter death experience. And I'll show you when we get off this. It was like a rainbowy one. So yeah, it's like what you were talking about. But it was like not just that. There was a whole bunch of different creatures all together. They were like doing something.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Anytime I've ever seen a mantoid, they had like almost like a laboratory. There was like a bunch of other things working with them and for them almost. It was very interesting.
There's a good comment in chat, which is from Gold Cat, who says, I have heard the tall white drive their own agenda and don't care that much about us. A lot of people in the world are mindless sheep and kind of hopeless.
Yeah.
So that is something that you should think about. Like, there's a lot of difference between how some people in the world behave and how others are, and how some people have a deeper understanding of things and other people are like just kind of mindless.
Yeah.
That doesn't make people better than other people,
No.
but it just means that people are different.
Yeah.
I'll add that.
And they do have their own agenda. Most of these entities would have their own agenda, just like most people would have their own agendas, and if you're not going to live how they live, they're not gonna, it's like they know a lot of spiritual knowledge that is our occultism and our religions, and they do live in a very godly thing, but it also sways them to be a little, it's interesting how they are.
John Egan says, I think that Antares, Mantis, insectoids have their own Stargate in the Scorpio constellation.
Yeah, go deeper, John, and look more in like the Draco constellation. So yeah, this is why the mantids and the draconians and reptilians actually have a treatise, because it's connected to all that. So that's cool. I'm glad you highlighted that. They definitely have one out there. for
Yeah,
sure.
John Egan is definitely with it. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, the Antarian
Yeah.
influence in the South African region. Yep. Yep. And then that's the thing, like what John's bringing up in the chats, you know, it's talking about the Antarian influence in South America region. Every culture, every continent, every human biome, or whatever you want to call it, has been influenced, manipulated, or infiltrated by some form of extra dimensional, non-human or human intelligence. There's just no way around it. But because they all are still very spiritual and religious, they all kind of came with their own religions. And we need to know, like, how can we do the same things they can do? Like, I want to know how I can levitate like an Arcturian. What would I have to do? You know, those are the things that I would like apply spiritually, you know, rather than like, hey, let's make mind control technology and how can we control everything, which you see it a lot of. Yeah.
To answer your question, if you got like really heavy into yoga and prana manipulation, you probably could do that.
Yeah, you can.
Also, Amanda Pelland, thank you so much for becoming a member of the channel.
Okay.
Sincerely appreciated. Thank you. And also Happy New Year to everyone. And also everyone who's just joining us now. Hello. Welcome. We still have at least 10 minutes and a couple more alien races to get through today.
Yeah.
Like we said, this is not by any means all the alien races. No. This is just some.
Yeah, that I've either remote viewed or perfectly experienced. The next one kind of goes into hybrids, and this is a big concept amongst ufology groups and, you know, things like that. They do exist. It is a real program. It's kind of sad, you know. I've been friends with people and I've met throughout my life that have come to me in my work that have been part of these kind of programs, and the emotional turmoil that they go through having these dreams and out of body experiences where they're being shown their kids, but they can't interact with them and do all this. It's just, it's really sad. But it's a real thing. It was created basically on those Orion Greys that I said were dying. You know, they were dying out, and it was just to be able to keep their genetics alive and kind of start blending it with humans. It was a genetic program. They're like, can we do this? And it takes the Orion Grey with a human genetic profile, and they match very well because Orion Greys were like distant human relation, if you would. So it worked really well, and what comes out of it is very much like a human, like we would be, but they have different facial features. Their jaw lines look a little bit different. Their faces are a little bit flatter, like their nose isn't as protruded. Their eyes are much larger. This is probably the one that has solidified how real all this was, even past my abductions and my experiences and, you know, my channelings and everything like that. This was the thing that solidified it all. Is I've been able to physically interact and like go visit one of them a couple times and interact with one, and it is probably the most intense experience you'd experience, you know. And they're a real thing, and it's a program that's existed actually much longer than people would even realize. So there's a lot of them. The one that I met, she actually lived on a lot of military bases, and she didn't really interact with a lot of people. And I got to physically meet her through various contexts that I was able to have, and it was life-changing. It was life-altering, and it was like, wow, I knew this was real before. This is insane.
And you were saying that, like, when you met her, it was so obvious that she was not completely human.
Yeah, she looked like a human. It was like you felt this like through your body, like you physically feel their vibration, and you didn't say anything to them that they didn't already know. They knew everything about you. Like they knew when you last ate. They knew what you ate. They just knew it like that. Because they're so telepathic. There's no hiding it. And in front of those people, you're like, oh my God, like, what a bad person. You know what I mean? Because they know everything. So they're very intense, but they're very loving, because that's one of the parts of the human genetic that mixed really well with the Orions, because the Orions bred all of it out, was the love vibration that humans naturally have that emit from the heart chakra. So blending that with the Orion Greys made this thing that looks like a human gray, but they're just very loving, like very loving, very calm, natural humans. So they could almost be looked at as like a next phase of humans, interestingly enough. So the project could be using people for these experiments and then having kids and stuff like that. Um, look at it as like it's saving a race that was dying, some human genetics. So it's a little bit more secret than even.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's just so amazing that you were able to actually meet an adult person.
Yeah.
That was part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adult.
That's
Yeah.
very, very curious.
Yeah. And also like knew their mother and father. So even the people in the program with them, like their parents and all that kind of stuff, was like knew all about it. So it's yeah. Pretty wild. Yeah. And it was weird because for weeks after me and them were hanging out and meeting, for weeks after, I mean, they were like invasively in my dreams, like constantly like appearing and doing all this stuff, because they have a very, very strong ability, which is, I think great. They're not human. They're not Orion Gray. They're a whole different species. I believe they they like they have a term. I don't know the exact term. I've heard it, but I hear it in my head, but I can't like say it, like not because it's like secret or anything like that, but because it's like it's hard to say. I don't want to sound stupid about it or degrade it by any means. So, but they do have a name for sure. They're not just hybrids. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool about Peru, John Egan.
Yeah, John. Yeah, some Nazca lines in Peru even look insectoid. They do. Yeah, they then there's also the ant people that are talked about, like even in like New Mexico and like Arizona and stuff. It's
yeah, it's so interesting. There's a great book. I actually have it. I actually have it right here. It's one of the books that this is one of the books that John gave to me.
Oh, good book.
When we first started dating. From Elsewhere. It's a great book. It's about how like so many people in this world are not necessarily completely human. And yeah.
It's really good. This book came to me weirdly. Like it wasn't even like I went looking for it. It was just like, oh, what's this?
That's a great book.
Yeah. I like Circus Skull here says chimera is the word you forgot, John.
Is that the word?
No, but yeah, they're chimeras. I mean, realistically, they're chimeras. But we can also look at like the Lyran Dracos and as chimeras and all these other genetic things, as a form of chimera. So it's quite cool. There's got a lot of comments here again. Yeah, Fred here says the Collins group was investigating Jack Parsons' possibility of being influenced by higher alien intelligence before he died. I would say that people probably should look more into that as well. Like, why was this man so interested in this kind of stuff? He did a lot.
That's a rabbit hole you can fall down into.
You will be able to find a lot of information about.
You might find more information than you care to have.
Yes, correct. You're like, wait, I don't want to know it anymore. Get it out. Get it out. Yeah, no, he's there's a lot to be had there for sure. Yeah. It's a cool concept.
I don't know. I am a practitioner of deep tantric Hinduism. I don't care about people's opinions.
Mhm.
I'm just focused on what I'm here to do, and that doesn't affect me on an emotional level. So I'm not offended. I don't even really exactly understand what you're saying, but that's okay. Thank you for expressing yourself here.
Yes. While Release says, "Has anyone heard of a book, Astral Voyages?" Yeah, I've read that. It's actually pretty cool. Yeah, it's an interesting book. Mhm. I believe it or not, I haven't read a lot of like books on those kind of concepts and stuff. And I have a lot of books, but it doesn't mean I've read them all. I like to collect books too, but there's very key books that I've read in whether it be occultism or magic and whatnot that I feel are like, wow, like it's cool. Like they definitely hit on some things there. So, but I know that book is a fun read.
Oh, that's awesome, tarot psychic healer.
Yeah, Hindu Buddhist practices are very good.
It's so
very
healing.
Good.
It's so healing.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next one, shall we? Because I like this one because this got really popular in the New Age world for quite some time, and like the UFO movement, where the blue avians that look like big blue birds, people like Corey Good, and I believe he still has contact with them and all that stuff, and he made them pretty well known, and that's fantastic. I think he did pretty good work with it outside of all the other stuff that's come with it. But they do exist, and that's what's crazy. And I did find that out in remote viewing sessions. I haven't personally interacted with them on the astral or in dream time, but in remote viewing sessions, I definitely can tell you that they are a thing. But what I've come to find is they're kind of like more of like a covert intelligence agency is what I felt them to be, and it kind of makes sense because they're birds. So like watching, they're wise, so they act more like an intelligence agency than anything else. So do they feel spiritual? Do they feel a good vibration? Yes, but they act as an intelligence agency more than an actual like spiritual philosophy.
John Egan, just to sort of non sequiturly pop back to what we were just talking about. John Egan is saying how like India and Hinduism feels to him like a Syrian A influence, same as Egypt and Sumer. If you study the Vedas, they do literally say that these gods exist in other dimensions and have their own planets.
Yeah. Yeah,
and we can
go
specifically
there. Says that.
It literally says that in the
Yes.
religious scriptures. I'm not like making it wacky. It's just people don't really look into that.
Correct. Yeah, it's not. It's even in the Vedas and stuff. They talk about a lot of things that have to do with that. So it's like,
It's a lot of really disturbing, weird.
Yeah, people have nothing better to do. They probably have no jobs or anything they could do.
Yeah,
it's okay. Nothing better to do. What was this? There was a question here I wanted to. So yeah, going off the Indian and Hinduism stuff, it's like there's so much like truth in that stuff, especially when they're like, hey, these are all things coming from different planets and different deities and gods and different entities. And really from, my perspective, I've looked a lot of like the Hindu deities even are found in like the nature of the jinn in Islam and they Tibetan Buddhism. And, we were talking about that a couple days ago, you and I, where they're all mirroring each other and there are all these different beings that are a part of a bigger system. And that's why Hinduism works so well when people actually use it. It does.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, obviously, in regards to like a lot of the really disturbing things that we're seeing in chat, there are groups that do horrible things to children, secret societies, and the world does not know about the horrors that go on. This is also why we are not part of any groups at all, because I don't want to be part of something where who knows what the fuck they're doing. And I have been part of all different kinds of cults when I was stupid and young. I've tried to learn about the world and
Yeah.
try to just help people know, like, be really careful about that. That's
Mhm.
definitely real and something
It
for
is.
people to really think about, because it's way worse than
It's
anything you would
it's
realize.
way
Yeah.
worse than you could ever imagine, and if
Mhm.
even if you thought you knew the truth of that, you were so far off, and the horrors would make you probably want to not be here. Um,
Mhm.
Dermatology says, do you think that Bastet is a Lyran and related to them in some way? Yes, we're about to actually get into Lyrans next. I
Yeah,
love how good this
absolutely.
all
That's
flows.
great.
Everybody's
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
they were, Sekhmet,
Mhm.
Bastet. There's others.
Mhm.
I mean, they were all Lyran.
Crown me status as a survivor of one of those child abuse
Well,
cults, and
yep,
is here today to talk
yep,
about that and tell people that it is definitely real.
yeah. I'm
Mhm.
glad you escaped, Crown. That's wonderful. You know, it's horrible. Yes, yes, they are,
Mhm.
Crown.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, Crown. It's more popular than people think it is, and it's horrible. And more light is being shined on those subjects, and eventually it's something that's going to be brought to light, thankfully. But yes, the Lyrans, they definitely exist, and if anybody's read my work, or even went to the Violet Gateway, know that
Mhm.
I'm heavily attached to the Lyrans.
Mhm.
They come from the Lyra star system, or used to. They're actually very warlike, weirdly. They're
Mhm.
very spiritual, but they've been through a lot of war. They've been through a lot of things like that have made them warrior like. So there's a priest class, there's a warrior class, but they don't really get into war. They're more
Mhm.
defensive, if you would. Uh, but they're very technologically advanced, spiritually advanced. Their frequency is connected to what I would consider like the Christ frequency, or the Christ frequency. They are connected to that, and I don't mean Christ as in like Jesus or Christianity. I don't mean it like that by any means. But they are on this very, very high frequency. They're kind of really, really good friends with like Arcturians and like Zeta Andromedans, not the Greys. So if anybody's ever seen a Grey with a Lyran entity,
Mhm.
it's not the bad one. It's actually the Zeta Andromedans. They're kind of like friends.
Mhm.
They work together, and they're one and the same almost. So there's the Lyrans that look like cats and lions and all those kind of things, but then there's also the human Lyrans, which you do see kind of fed with into like the Aldebarans, and there's also the ones that still just say, no, I'm Lyran, I'm a human Lyran, rather than saying like I'm an Aldebaran, or imprinting that upon you. So, but the Lyrans are very real, and they don't really interact much. They're more about like magic and mystery and occultism, to be honest with you, than
Mhm.
anything else, and like meditation and spiritual practice. So a lot of their things, they don't, they're more tuned to like the mystery schools, and we can give credit to them through like the Egyptian mystery schools and Atlantean mystery schools.
Mhm.
That's really kind of where they lie. Where was that Syrian A comment earlier? Wasn't that Syria? Wasn't it?
From John Egan. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah, earlier, Johnny, and you said India Hinduism feels like Syrian A influence, same as Egypt and Sumer. I'm about to talk about Syrian A's. They definitely have influenced Egyptian culture, even a lot of our earlier cultures. It has a lot to do with like technology and like spiritual trade and all that kind of stuff. They are humanoid. They're generally bluish skin, I guess you could say, kind of silvery bluish skin. What I like about the Syrians when I've seen them or interacted with them in like dreams or remote viewing or out of body, it they kind of remind me of like those like the super ceremonial magicians. That's kind of what they look like. They're very adorned. They're always very adorned. They look very magical. But they're kind of like really what they into like the galactic spectrum, especially like weapons here on Earth and military programs.
Mhm.
They're kind of like a galactic arms dealer, but they're like, hey, you got it. You can use whatever you want. They're very distinguishable from like, okay, we gave this, we don't care what you use it. We're not karmically aligned to what you would ever use this for. So
Mhm.
they're very spiritually sound in their own thing, and they don't really sway from that. Yeah. Super connected to the Dogon tribe too in Africa, Sirius A and Sirius B. The beings from Sirius B, though, they're completely different. They actually look more like amphibians, dolphin-like. So a little bit different. They're very telepathic, and they don't really work. I mean, they don't do the same things as the other ones, as far as I know. But they just have more of a natural connection to more of the aquatic life. And I know their technology is very aquatic. So very much so, some of the weird USOs or UFOs people see coming out of the ocean, it might be them. Who knows? I haven't looked into it.
People are talking about alien implants in chat now.
Oh, good. Where's this?
I've had them. I've woken up with them in like the back of my neck.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just goes away one day. It's just gone. It can feel like a square, like rectangular shape. I also was having a lot of markings on my body at that time.
And there's etheric implants and physical implants. Physical implants usually will have a physical feel to them, like there'll be something in the skin, or feel it like underneath somewhere if you're digging in, like through like massage or like deep tissue. And sometimes it might feel like even like one of those like calcium deposit muscle things where it's like, oh, you got a little knot there. Sometimes it feels like a knot, but somebody that's trained enough will know the difference between them. But then there's also the etheric ones too that they'll input on the etheric body. Samyaza says, who tries to block you from seeing Antarctica, and can you see them? It's a technology thing. I'm sure it's our the people that own it, which is almost every single country has stock in Antarctica. It's a technology, actually, Samyaza. It's not even like it's a person. It's like a fence. It's really weird. Cromie says, I have actually seen alien beings in the physical other than meditation state, but many UFOs, and I've seen some pictures where reparations have shown up. Yeah, that's great, Crown. Same here. I've seen them physically and non-physically, and that's the difference between an ET and an alien. An alien's always physical. An ET is physical and non-physical. They have the ability to do this a lot like a jinn, a lot like a jinn would. So that's why I've always kind of talked about how jinn and ET are very similar in their nature. Very.
There's a few more in the article, right?
The last ones. Okay. The Rigelians. The Rigelians typically are from the Orion constellation. They kind of look like the old Orion Greys did, but they look a little bit more human. Because they are from Orion, the Rigelians are sometimes still considered Orion Greys. So people are still talking about Orion Greys to this day, and they don't know that the Orions are kind of not around anymore. They're really talking about the Rigelians, and they're tallish, 5.5 feet tall, pretty evolved. They're kind of Buddhist in nature. They're very peaceful from what I've been able to tell. They don't like to really get involved in things. They have their own thing going, but they live like a governed life. Like they're being governed by something else. You know what I mean? So it's but I've personally only seen these a couple times actually during my labs. And they didn't have a negative vibe to them. They're just present, The negative ones were considered like they're still Rigelians, but they look a lot different. They kind of look like the fantasy dwarves a little bit, but their bodies are really small and they kind of have larger heads and humanoid, kind of pointy ears. That's why I use the picture that I use. They look very much like that. But they're very military. They feel like they're kings. They typically are in cahoots with like the reptilians and the draconian forces, and that's why they feel like they are, because we have their backing. We are this, so I could see why they would, I guess, think that. But they're much more technologically advanced than they are spiritually. So they're not like telepathic like you would think. They probably use the other ones actually as like their form of telepathic, and like, you are working for us, but they really lack any kind of true spiritual connection, and they get it from everything else that they're trying to control. And that's really what's on the list of things. But yeah, this is not comprehensive, in the blog or the article here, or what we even talked about. There's a lot of details to a lot of this, and really it takes experience and research and, a lot of time to really put all of it together. And this is just a small drop in the bucket to really what this was. Because if you look at such a big concept as this, it's not as simple as this. There's a lot of questions that should be had with it.
Yeah, so that was a lot to cover today. And of course,
Was.
not all alien races, that's not possible to do. This is just some. If you want to see the full article, please go read the full article and also check out the rest of the Violet Gateway. You can find Vermilion's recent book release called Esoteric Prayer. That is linked in the description as well. A bunch of other stuff is linked there too. If you do want to reach either of us and see all of our different online classes and things of that nature, please check out all the links in the description of this video. If you're new, please hit subscribe and like this video, share it with everyone you know. I hope that you all have a really good and safe.
It's been fun. Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.